What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved comedians sits down for what should be a lighthearted interview, only to find himself under attack from a host determined to tear him down? Today, we're diving into the explosive moment that left Jim Carrey walking off the View stage. Trust me, you won't believe how it unfolded. Be sure to subscribe and leave a comment below, because this story gets absolutely wild. The studio lights were bright that Tuesday morning as Jim Carrey settled into his chair on The View. A familiar grin crossed his face. He was there to promote his latest project, expecting the usual banter about his career and a few laughs about his iconic roles. What he got instead was something very different. Joy Behar leaned forward, her expression already hinting at confrontation. "So, Jim," she began, her tone sharp enough to grab the attention of everyone in the studio. "Let's talk about your recent comments about the entertainment industry. Some people are calling them unhinged." Jim's smile faded slightly, but he stayed composed. "Well, Joy, when you've been in this business as long as I have, you start to see things differently. You see the machinery behind the magic, and sometimes that can be eye-opening. Eye-opening or delusional." Joy shot back. "Because to a lot of people, it sounds like you've completely lost touch with reality." The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances. Whoopi Goldberg shifted in her seat, sensing the tension. Sarah N. looked down at her notes, while Sunny Hostin raised an eyebrow at Joy's aggressive tone. Jim's expression hardened. "I'm sorry, are we having an interview here, or an interrogation? I thought I was here to talk about my work, not to be psychoanalyzed by someone who's never walked in my shoes." "Oh, please," Joy scoffed, waving him off. "Spare us the victim act. You come on these shows, make bizarre statements about Hollywood conspiracies and spiritual awakenings, and then get upset when someone calls you out. Bizarre statements." Jim repeated, his voice rising. "I've been honest about my experiences. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe the problem isn't with what I'm saying." Joy leaned back, a smug smile crossing her face. "Honest? You've said celebrities are puppets in some grand scheme. You talk about ego death and cosmic consciousness like you're some kind of guru. Do you realize how that sounds to normal people? Normal people." Jim's eyes flashed with hurt and anger. "Joy, with all due respect, you don't get to decide what's normal. I've had experiences that changed my perspective on life, on fame, on what really matters. If that sounds crazy to you, so be it." The studio fell silent. Cameramen adjusted their positions, capturing every moment as the exchange intensified. Joy wasn't backing down. "You made millions entertaining people," she said. "Now you want to bite the hand that fed you. You want to tell everyone the industry that made you rich and famous is corrupt?" "I never said evil," Jim replied, steady but strained. "But yes, there are unhealthy aspects, constant validation. Treating people like commodities, the pressure to maintain an image that isn't authentic. Is it wrong to talk about that?" "What's wrong," Joy interrupted, "is pretending you're a victim when you've benefited more than most people ever will. You made a fortune making people laugh, and now you act like Hollywood is a prison." Sarah N. finally tried to intervene. "Maybe we could talk about Jim's upcoming project. I think the audience would like to hear what you're working on now." But Joy wasn't finished. Turning to Sarah, she said, "No, this matters. Jim is spreading conspiracy theories and anti-industry sentiment, and viewers deserve to know where this comes from." Jim leaned forward, hands clasped tightly. "Conspiracy theories. Joy, I've shared my personal journey. I've talked about realizing fame and money didn't fulfill me. How is that a conspiracy theory? Because you're implying there's something sinister about an industry that employs millions." Joy fired back. "You're feeding a narrative that Hollywood controls or manipulates society. That's conspiracy territory." "You're putting words in my mouth," Jim said, his frustration clear. I've never said anything about mind control or manipulation. I've talked about my own experience of feeling empty despite having everything I thought I wanted. I've talked about finding meaning beyond material success. If that threatens you somehow, I don't know what to tell you." Joy laughed, but it wasn't pleasant. "Threatens me. Jim, I've been in this business longer than you. I've seen plenty of celebrities have midlife crises and start spouting philosophy. The difference is, most of them don't do it on national television while bad-mouthing the very industry that made them relevant." The tension in the studio was palpable. Whoopi looked like she wanted to step in, but seemed unsure how. The other hosts were visibly uncomfortable, and Jim appeared to be reaching the end of his patience. "You know what, Joy?" Jim said quietly, his voice intense. "I came here thinking we could have a real conversation about art, about life, about what it means to be human in this crazy world. Instead, you seem determined to paint me as some delusional has-been who's lost his mind." "I'm not painting you as anything," Joy replied coolly. "I'm asking why you think it's appropriate to use your platform to spread negativity about an industry that's given you everything. Given me everything?" Jim's voice rose again. "Joy, do you have any idea what it's like to lose yourself so completely in a character, in a persona, that you forget who you really are? To have millions of people love an image of you while you feel completely hollow inside?" "Oh, boo-hoo," Joy said with mock sympathy. "Poor little rich actor having an existential crisis. You signed up for this life, Jim. Nobody forced you to become a celebrity." The comment struck deep. Jim's face flushed, and for a moment, the composure he'd maintained completely slipped. He stared at Joy, breathing slightly heavier. When he spoke again, his voice was colder, more controlled than anyone had heard from him in public. "Nobody forced me to become a celebrity," he said slowly. "You're right about that, Joy. But nobody warned me I'd be sitting across from people like you people who seem to take pleasure in tearing others down for having the audacity to grow and change." Joy's eyes narrowed. "I'm not tearing you down, Jim. I'm asking you to take responsibility for your words and actions. There's a difference. Responsibility." Jim let out a bitter laugh. "Joy, I've taken more responsibility for my life in the past few years than in the previous decades combined. I've examined my mistakes, my choices, my patterns. I've done the work to understand why I made the decisions I did. What I won't do is apologize for speaking honestly about what I've learned." Whoopi finally stepped in. "Jim, I think what Joy is trying to say is that when you have a platform like yours, your words carry weight. People listen. Now that's exactly why I feel obligated to tell the truth," Jim replied, turning to Whoopi with a more respectful tone. "Whoopi, you, of all people, understand what it means to use your voice authentically. I'm not telling people what to think or how to live. I'm sharing my own journey, but Joy wasn't done. Your journey includes statements that could damage other people's careers and livelihoods. When you talk about the industry being fake or manipulative, you're not just talking about your own experience. You're making broad generalizations that affect real people." "What real people?" Jim asked, his patience thinning again. "The executives who treat actors like commodities. The agents who care more about commissions than their clients' well-being. The publicists who create fake personas and sell them to the public. The thousands of crew members, writers, directors, producers, and craft services workers," Joy shot back. "All the hardworking people who depend on this industry to feed their families. When you paint Hollywood with such a negative brush, you diminish their work too." Jim shook his head. "Joy, you're deliberately misunderstanding me. I've never attacked the hardworking people who make movies and television possible. I'm talking about a system that prioritizes profit over people, image over authenticity. Those are two very different things, are they?" Joy leaned forward again, her voice taking on a prosecutorial edge. Because it seems like you're happy to take the money from that system while condemning it at the same time. Isn't that a little hypocritical? The studio fell silent, broken only by the low hum of the cameras. Jim looked at Joy, his expression suggesting he was weighing whether she was worth the effort to respond. "You know what's hypocritical, Joy?" he said at last. "Pretending that asking for authenticity is an attack on someone's character. You've been in this business for decades. You've seen what it does to people. You've watched talented individuals lose themselves chasing fame and fortune. Yet here you are defending a system you know can be destructive simply because it's been good to you." Joy's face reddened. "I'm defending an industry that's provided entertainment, jobs, and economic growth for this country. I'm defending the idea that maybe successful people should show some gratitude instead of constantly complaining about how hard their privileged lives are." "There it is," Jim said, a sad smile crossing his face. "Gratitude. That's what this is really about, isn't it? You think that because I've been successful, I should just shut up and be thankful. Never mind that success without fulfillment is just a prettier form of misery." "Oh, please." Joy rolled her eyes. "You sound like a self-help book written by someone who's never had a real problem in their life." The remark landed like a physical blow. Jim's demeanor shifted, his face hardening in a way that made everyone in the studio uneasy. "Never had a real problem?" he asked quietly. "Do you know anything about my childhood? Do you know what it was like growing up in poverty, watching my father work job after job just to keep our family afloat? Do you know what it was like feeling responsible for making everyone happy because humor was the only way I knew how to cope with pain?" Joy looked briefly shaken, then recovered. "I'm not trying to diminish your background, Jim, but let's be honest. You've been wealthy and famous for most of your adult life. Whatever struggles you had as a child, you've had the resources to address them for years. Resources." Jim's voice rose again. "You can't buy your way out of trauma. You can't purchase self-worth. You can't write a check to fill the void that comes from spending years pretending to be someone you're not. Money doesn't fix everything, no matter what you seem to believe." Sarah Ann tried again to steer the conversation. "Maybe we could talk about how those experiences have influenced your creative process. I imagine that kind of reflection affects how you approach roles now." But Jim kept his eyes on Joy, intense and unwavering. "You want to know what I've learned? The people most threatened by authenticity are usually the ones most invested in keeping their own masks intact. And when someone attacks you for being honest about your struggles, it's often because your honesty makes them uncomfortable about their own choices." Joy's jaw tightened. "Are you psychoanalyzing me now, Jim? Last I checked, you're not a licensed therapist. And last I checked," Jim shot back, "you're not a licensed judge of other people's personal growth. But that hasn't stopped you from spending the last 10 minutes tearing apart everything I've shared about my journey." The tension in the room neared a breaking point. Sunny Hostin looked as if she wanted to disappear under the table. Whoopi shook her head slightly, clearly wishing the interview had gone another way. "You know what I think, Jim?" Joy said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I think you're going through a phase. I think you'll come back to reality eventually, and when you do, you'll realize all this spiritual guru nonsense was just another role. Another character you chose to play because the real Jim Carrey wasn't interesting enough anymore." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jim stared at Joy for what felt like an eternity, his face shifting through hurt, anger, disappointment, and finally something close to pity. "Another character," he repeated softly. "Joy, what if I told you that all those characters I played, all those roles that made people laugh, were the performances? What if the person sitting here right now, trying to have an honest conversation about what it means to be human, what if this is the real me?" Joy shrugged dismissively. "Then I'd say the real you is a lot less entertaining than the fake version." The silence that followed was deafening. Jim sat still for several seconds, absorbing her words. When he finally looked up, there was something different in his eyes, a clarity that hadn't been there before. "You know what, Joy?" he said calmly, his voice carrying an unmistakable finality. "You just proved everything I've been trying to say about this industry. You just showed why so many people in entertainment are miserable, why they turn to substances, why they have breakdowns, and why some of them take their own lives." Joy tried to interrupt, but Jim raised his hand. "No, let me finish, because this matters. You just told me that the real me, the authentic me's less entertaining than a fake version. Do you understand what you just said? You told a human being that their authentic self has less value than a performance." The other hosts were now staring at Joy, visibly uncomfortable. Whoopi shook her head more noticeably, while Sarah looked genuinely upset. "Jim, I didn't mean it like that," Joy began, but her voice lacked conviction. "You meant it exactly like that," Jim replied firmly. "And that attitude, the belief that people are only valuable when they're performing for your amusement, that's the toxic mindset I've been talking about. That's why I had to step away and figure out who I really was beneath all those characters." Joy's face was flushed. Whether from anger or embarrassment, it was hard to tell. "You're being overly dramatic, Jim. I was simply pointing out that your fans fell in love with your comedy, not your philosophical rambling." "My philosophical rambling," Jim repeated, and for the first time since the interview began, he smiled. It wasn't a warm expression. "I told you I grew up in poverty. I told you about trauma, about losing myself in fame, about doing the hard work to rediscover who I am. And you called it rambling?" He stood slowly, reaching for the microphone clipped to his jacket. "This is exactly why I don't do many interviews anymore. This is why I'm careful about the platforms I use. Because there are people like you who think vulnerability is weakness, that growth is nonsense. That authenticity is somehow less valuable than entertainment." Joy realized she was losing control of the situation. "We could have had a civilized conversation," Jim said, carefully removing the microphone. "But you chose to turn this into an attack. You mocked my journey, my experiences, my growth. You told me the real me isn't good enough for your audience." Whoopi finally spoke. "Jim, please, let's take a breath. We can start over." Jim turned to her, respect clear in his voice. "Whoopi, you're a class act, and I admire you. But I'm not going to sit here and let someone tear apart my character under the guise of journalism. This isn't journalism. It's bullying." Joy stood as well, her voice rising. "Bullying. You came on this show to promote your work. That means handling tough questions about your public statements. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." "Tough questions." Jim laughed, without humor. "You attacked my mental state, dismissed my experiences, mocked my journey, and told me I was less valuable as an authentic person than as a performer. Those aren't questions. Those are insults disguised as journalism." The studio audience was silent, watching with a mix of fascination and horror. Some had their phones out, clearly recording what they knew was an unprecedented moment in television history. Joy's voice sharpened. "You're being incredibly unprofessional right now, Jim. This is live television. You can't just walk away because you don't like the direction of the conversation." Jim paused, looking at her with what seemed like genuine sadness. "Joy, do you know what's truly unprofessional? Inviting someone on your show under the pretense of promoting their work, then spending the entire time trying to tear them down personally. Do you know what's unprofessional? Using your platform to attack someone's character instead of engaging with their ideas." He turned toward the cameras, speaking directly to the audience. "You know what, folks? This is exactly what I've been talking about. This is the kind of toxic environment that exists in parts of this industry, where people are valued only for their ability to entertain, where authenticity is treated like a flaw, where personal growth is mocked and dismissed. Joy was growing desperate. "Jim, you're making a scene." "This isn't necessary." "Making a scene?" Jim asked, raising his eyebrows. "Joy, you spent the last 15 minutes making a scene. You turned what should have been a pleasant conversation into a character assassination. I'm just refusing to participate in it anymore." Sarah N. tried one last time to mediate. "Jim, maybe we could talk about your upcoming projects. I know you have some exciting things in the works." Jim smiled at Sarah, his expression softening slightly. "Sarah, you seem like a genuinely nice person, and I appreciate your attempt to steer this in a positive direction. But it's clear this isn't the right environment for a constructive conversation." He looked around the studio, taking in the shocked crew, the uncomfortable hosts, and Joy's red, angry face. "You know what I've learned?" he said, his voice carrying through the room. "I've learned that you can't force people to understand your journey. You can't make someone respect your growth if they're invested in keeping you in the box they've made for you. And you definitely can't have an authentic conversation with someone who sees authenticity as a flaw." Joy tried once more. "So you're just going to run away? This is how you handle conflict now." Jim stopped and turned to her one last time. "Joy, walking away from toxicity isn't running away. It's self-respect. It's recognizing that not every battle is worth fighting, especially when the other person has no interest in actually listening." He looked back at the cameras. "To anyone watching who's struggling with their own journey of self-discovery, is trying to figure out who they really are beneath other people's expectations, don't let people like this discourage you. Don't let anyone tell you your authentic self isn't valuable. Don't let anyone convince you that growth and change are signs of weakness or instability." Joy's voice rose. "You can't just leave in the middle of an interview. This is unprofessional." Jim was already walking toward the exit, but he called back over his shoulder. "What's unprofessional is using your platform to attack someone's character instead of engaging with their ideas. What's unprofessional is inviting someone on your show just to tear them down. I hope someday you figure out the difference." With that, Jim Carrey walked off the view stage, leaving behind a stunned studio, a speechless audience, and Joy Behar, mouth open, finally realizing